Hello and welcome back to my podcast, The True Crime Cocktail Hour. This is where we come together after a tough week of work to enjoy a little after-work cocktail together and take a closer look at a mysterious true crime case. There were again 3 cases for you to choose from, and you guys decided for the top one, and I have to apologize to you on that matter. When I first heard about this case, I thought it was so interesting I wanted to talk about it, but I thought it was set in Germany. I don't know why. But it's actually not. It's set in South Tyrol, Italy. Sorry. In keeping of today's case, we'll be having an Italian gin and tonic. If you want to recreate this cocktail, just keep on watching this video. I'll add the ingredients and several steps to make this cocktail as the story progresses. And with that, I would say, let's not lose any more time and get everything ready. And let's begin. See what I did there? No? Okay. Today's story brings us to Saint Gertraud, and to the year 1973. Saint Gertraud lies in a very small valley, the so-called Val d'Ultimo, which translates to the valley that comes last. There's actually just one street that leads right to it. In Saint Gertraud, there aren't even street names. The houses are numbered. That's enough. Now, in the neighboring villages, hardly a good word is lost about the people of Saint Gertraud. These people are supposed to be religiously blinded, highly conservative, stubborn, and hostile against everything foreign. I mean, the religious thing, I guess that's true. The Catholic Church is an integral part of everyday life there. Even today, the woman's most common name is Mary, and the man's most common name is Joseph. This was also the case for the new priest who arrived in Val d'Ultimo on September the 15th, 1973. Joseph Steinkasserer was born on the 11th of March, 1939, in the southeast of South Tyrol as the eldest son of a mountain farmer family. He has 3 brothers and 1 sister, and it was actually normal at the time for the eldest son to take over the family's business and the second eldest son to become a clergyman. But things were different with the Steinkasserer's family. Joseph had absolutely no interest in taking over his family's business, and so at the age of 11, he moved to the episcopal city of Brixen to attend the priest seminary there. And he was ordained a priest at the age of 24. Initially, he worked in various parishes in Merano, where he supported the head priest, George Pierre. And these two are especially popular with the younger generation. They just represent a whole new church, perfectly suited to the overall social upheaval of the 1970s. Val d'Ultimo, on the other hand, feels like it had remained in the Middle Ages. Most of the houses have no mains water. There is exactly 1 television in the entire valley. Joseph Steinkasserer brings the second one with him. But Joseph's transfer to Saint Gertraud meant a huge career leap for him. And he was appointed pastor there at the age of 34. And for him it was basically a dream come true because he had this whole deeply religious village all for himself. And so, on September the 15th, 1973, he moved into this small vicarage, house number 120, right next to the church. And both the church and the vicarage, they stand on top of a hill, and you have like this spectacular view over whole Saint Gertraud. But Joseph does not move in alone. Back in Merano, he had already been assigned a parish householder, a woman who took care of the household, laundry, the cooking, and just basically was by the pastor's side at all times. And this lady's name was Luise Platzgummer. She was 64 years old, a butcher's widow with, quote, an impeccable character, and strict moral stance. So when Joseph was transferred to Saint Gertraud, he had just asked her to come with him. And let me just say, this new pastor is incredibly well received by the overall congregation. He is just so different to his predecessor. He is more approachable, more human, and he looks so wonderfully harmless with his horn-rimmed glasses and his brown curls. Today, half a century later, it can no longer be determined what exactly happened that night. But thanks to court records, interrogation reports, and the research of a private detective, we are still able to reconstruct the events of said night. So it's the 6th of November, 1973. Between 1:30 and 2 a.m. in the morning, the pastor, Joseph Steinkasserer, with a plastic stick, knocks on one of the windows of the tavern called Goldstar, which is less than a mile away from the vicarage, saying that he urgently needed to talk to the owner of the tavern. Now, the owner of this tavern is a man called Hans Bertagnoli, 38 years of age and the right hand of the priest. He prepares the masses, helps the priest get dressed, and so on. And Joseph and him, they get on quite well. So sleepy and still in his pajamas, the owner of the tavern, Hans, he comes down the stairs and he is startled as he looks at Joseph. He is totally beside himself. And then on top of that, he has a wound on his cheekbone and on his right hand. So the owner of the tavern, he got Joseph a brandy. And Joseph just sat there and he told Hans that there had been a robbery. Robbers came into his house at night and beat him up. Hans then called the nearest carabinieri station at the end of the valley, and according to the officer who took the call, it was 1:45 a.m. So at the priest's request, Hans first walked over to the vicarage by himself, and Joseph had also asked him to bring him his glasses that he had lost during the attack. So Hans goes into the vicarage. Everything's quiet. He finds the glasses on the second floor, perfectly undamaged. But when he was just about to go downstairs, he noticed that the landing and the floors of the bedroom, Joseph's bedroom, and his studies are covered in blood. There are also shards of a porcelain jug all across the study. And there's also this felt head, also bloodstained, that lies right in front of a cupboard. And let me just say, this felt hat should cause a lot of trouble. So Hans leaves the vicarage again. He goes back down to the tavern. He gets Joseph his glasses. And a little later, the two of them return to the vicarage together. And this is when Joseph showed Hans a broken window in the storeroom, and he claimed that this is how the robbers came into the house. And this is when he suddenly remembers that he wasn't alone in the house as the robbery took place. What about his housekeeper, Luise? She must have heard the attack. Her bedroom is on the first floor, after all. So Hans and Joseph, they walk over to her bedroom and the door is closed, and Joseph knocks on the door. But when he received no answer, he opened the door and he turned on the light. Luise's dead body was lying on the floor right next to her bed, only dressed in a nightgown and tied up. Endless pieces of clothing and coat hangers are scattered everywhere, and there are a lot of blood stains overall the bed linen and the walls. Luise's hands are tied behind her back, her legs are bent and tied together at her ankles with pieces of clothing. Her underwear is pulled down to her knees. Her whole body, but especially her face, is covered in scratches and bruises. 2 ribs are broken, and there are blunt forced trauma wounds on her forehead and on the back of her head. The autopsy revealed that Luise was first strangled and then suffocated with her own pillow. She was tied up after she died. The news of the murder in the vicarage hit the valley, hit Saint Gertraud like a bomb. And at first, things seemed to be clear. Strangers, probably gypsies, committed the crime. Around 20 residents would later claim they heard a car speeding out of the valley before the priest knocked on the windows of this tavern to ask for help. And speaking of Joseph, whole South Tyrol celebrates him as a hero. He had not been able to prevent Luise's murder, but he had put the robbers to flight. Okay, here you go. Aren't these pretty? Cheers. But this whole story about the alleged robbery sounds strange to at least one man. The 38-year-old Carabinieri captain, very experienced officer, Arno Mandolesi. He is one of the few at the time who was able to speak German as well as Italian. And he would later write in his report that Luise's wallet, her ID card, and a few tickets were found in front of her bedroom. Mandolesi is also the officer who found Luise's watch under her shoulder, and the watch had stopped at 1:45 a.m. So Mandolesi assumed that this was the time of the murder, which leads us to the question why the pastor only called for help 1 hour later. And there are a couple more things. Mandolesi, he's also wondering about the inconspicuously loose bondage of the dead woman. And then in the priest's office, they find a whole waste paper basket full of Underberger bottles, a high-proof herbal liquor, 24 bottles to be precise, not to forget the blood-stained felt hat. The priest himself described the crime as follows. He was woken up at 1 a.m. by conspicuous noises coming out of his study. So he got up, he got dressed, put on his glasses. But then in the study, he ran into two masked figures who threatened him with a pistol. One of them shouted, "Spera, spera," in a very strange Italian, and that means shoot, shoot. But the other one doesn't shoot. Instead, he just started beating this pastor up. He gets hold of the porcelain jug and in defense hurls it at the attackers. And according to him, this is how he put them to flight. And while running away, apparently one of them lost his felt hat. But Mandolesi doesn't buy this story even one bit. He lets the sniffer dogs have a go at it, but without any success. And why in God's name, he wonders, would burglars come to this remote place where there's nothing much to get anyway, kill the vicarage maid, and then, despite being armed, let themselves be driven away by one single man with a porcelain jug? Why is the priest's bed sitting unused even though he claimed he had slept in it? Why didn't he look for his housemaid right after the attack? Why wait this long to get help? So Mandolesi carefully listed all of these contradictions in a 14-page long report, and he handed it over to the prosecutor's office. And one day later, 3 days after the murder, the priest, Joseph Steinkasserer, was arrested for murder. His arrest obviously got through to the church superiors, who were outraged, and they set heaven and hell in motion to prove the priest's innocence. Donations were collected to provide him with the best lawyer possible because things don't really look good for Joseph Steinkasserer. Not only does Mandolesi keep uncovering more contradictions in his statements, no, investigators also found letters in the priest's possessings that proved that the pastor over here is maybe not as saintly as he pretends to be. As it turned out, the priest, Joseph Steinkasserer, had several affairs with all kinds of different women. Some of them are married, some of them are under the age of 18. And they all visit him in his vicarage. And whenever they don't, they write letters to the priest in which they describe their longing and thankfulness for the, quote, happy hours they got to spend with him. But that's not all. They also found a couple of juicy pictures. On one of them, Joseph is sitting on a bed together with a young lady, and another one shows two girls getting undressed, taken during a youth camp. They also found a book about the Knaus-Ogino method, a method that can help you calculate on which days a woman can get pregnant, which incidentally is the only contraceptive method accepted by the Catholic Church at the time. So the investigators see a lot of possible motives in all of this. For example, at the beginning of November 1973, Luise came back home early from a trip to her hometown, and maybe she caught the priest doing something nasty. Maybe she saw something that she was not supposed to see. So when they confronted the priest with these accusations, he clearly denied everything, and apparently he did that so convincingly that this trace was no longer pursued. Another theory is that the pastor expected a lady to visit that very evening, but got stood up. And then, in his frustration and anger, poured down 24 bottles of Underburger liquor down his throat and let his sexual frustration out on his mate. But the priest also denied this, saying that Luise only ever emptied the waste paper basket when it was full. And that brings us to the felt hat. Because you see, surprisingly, the tavern owner, Hans Bertagnoli, mentioned something towards Mandolesi, the carabinieri officer, that he had not mentioned in his previous interrogations. And that was the fact that he actually saw this felt hat once before, between Joseph Steinkasserer's stuff the day he moved into the vicarage. Honey, this statement triggered a feud in the village. My goodness, some people believed Hans Bertagnoli, some just thought he was trying to get rid of the priest, and then some thought that he was actually the murderer who was just trying to blame the murder on the priest now. It got so bad that in March of 1974, 20 young gentlemen, all devout Catholics and fans of the priest, went into the tavern during opening hours and vandalized it. So as divided as the village is, as united is the rest of South Tyrol, and they all agree that the priest is innocent. The idea that a clergyman, a representative of the church, would succumb to his base urges so much that he committed a murder was unbearable. Priests are men of God. Priests do not murder. So on April the 24th, 1974, the trial against Joseph Steinkasserer began, and he had the top lawyer, Hugo Gamper, by his side. And the first thing he did was submitting an expert opinion that the window was smashed from the outside, definitely, and not from the inside. The bloodstains in Luise's bedroom can all be attributed to her, blood group O. Likewise, the skin particles under her fingernails, also blood type O. The priest has blood type B positive, and this blood group was only found in his bedroom and in his study. And when he tried on the felt hat on the second day of trial, it turned out that the hat was too small for him. Meanwhile, Hans Bertagnoli still claimed that he had seen this felt hat in Joseph's possessings before. During the trial, the public also learned about the letters and juicy photos the priest had in his belongings, and the church, they reacted with embarrassment, you know. Joseph's fondness of alcohol and young ladies was actually no secret among the clergy, but, it was rather difficult to justify in public. The defense took this to their advantage, saying, why would the pastor go for a 64-year-old when he had a whole bunch of younger women falling in love with him? Even Luise's own sisters testified in court in favor of the priest. Get this, saying that Luise oftentimes slept with her underwear down to her knees because it would allegedly keep her legs warm. What? Yeah, right. Gee, I don't know, get a second blanket. So when the verdict was to be announced on March the 22nd, 1974, a lot of people expected a full acquittal. And Joseph Steinkasserer was in fact acquitted, but not fully, merely for a lack of evidence. The defense appealed this. It was confirmed in the second trial, acquittal for lack of evidence. Now get this, the defense, they tried again, right? But the second appeal trial did not take place in South Tyrol, but in Van Nuys in 1977. Unfortunately, though, the inhibition threshold to convict a German-speaking clergyman was a little bit lower in Van Nuys than it was in South Tyrol. And this priest ended up being found guilty after all and sentenced to 14 years in prison. But the church's board is not even close to be prepared to accept this, and they get help from Germany. And they hire a man called Johannes Meyer. He is a chief inspector in Munich, and he is actually close to retirement. And then he gets the offer to investigate the case of Luise Platzgummer, and it would be the case of his lifetime, as he would later say. So this man questions over 200 people, goes through all the court documents, reads the interrogation reports, goes through the autopsy report, and he comes to the conclusion that the priest is in fact innocent. The problem was that he couldn't prove it. Instead, he presented another suspect, a man that I even briefly mentioned before, and that was Joseph's former superior, the priest George Peer. George Peer and Joseph Steinkasserer spoke a lot to each other in private after the murder, but they always kept quiet about what. And after Joseph's arrest, George Peer all of a sudden vanished from the face of the earth. The private detective heard something about an alleged suicide attempt. That was enough for this private detective to continue his research into this George Peer guy, and he found out about his infamous youth camps. Youth camps in which, quote, assaults are the most desirable and adventurous parts. You heard that right. Praying during the day, and then at night, all these young people would go out together with their priest and, I don't know, rob another youth camp or break into houses. And on one occasion, a man who was also a priest was tied to his bed by these young people. So could it be that Luise was also a victim of such an attack? So 8 years after the murder, in the year of 1981, the fourth and final trial took place against Joseph Steinkasserer for the murder of Luise Platzgummer. And like the first two it ended with an acquittal, merely for the lack of evidence. Since then, this murder case remains quiet. The investigation was ended and closed in 1993, even though in 2006, one again tried to re-examine the DNA found at the crime scene. Without success, there was not much material left that was usable. And the case remains unsolved and will probably never be solved. The private detective Johannes Meyer has died in the meantime, as did Arno Mandolesi, the Carabinieri officer, and the main suspect of today's story, Joseph Steinkasserer. He had become completely addicted to alcohol in the course of his life. Thank you so much for joining me today. Go comment and subscribe and give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. It's always a very nice thing to see. Before I say goodbye, I wish you all a Merry Christmas, a wonderful time with your loved ones. I also wish you a Happy New Year's Eve. I hope you get well into this new year. It's gonna be exciting, that's for sure. Other than that, I will see you again on the 3rd of January for another cocktail and, of course, another mysterious true crime case. Until then, take care and have a nice weekend, and I see you then.